So
Well,
here we are.
hi, Joe. Thanks for helping me with my project.
Yeah. Hi, it's good to see you.
Um, so, could you maybe say a little bit about yourself? I mean, I read The Forever War, excellent book. I highly recommend it to everybody. Um, and I know you served in Vietnam, and I was wondering if maybe you could just give a brief intro.
Okay, my name is Joe Haldeman. Joe Haldeman. And yeah, I've been writing for about 52 years or something. And yes, I served in Vietnam, but that sounds so strange because I didn't serve except the way dishes are served at Thanksgiving or something like that. I was drafted and went to fight somebody else's war, which I should have forgiven them for by now. I don't know why. I'm just an old grouch, I guess. And yeah, so there's that. And I write for a living, have done for a long time, and mainly because I'm just way too lazy to get a real job. And basically, and I'm not smart enough to put on my real glasses. Here are my real glasses. Ah, I can see. Remarkable. Yeah, what do you want? I have written many books. People mostly know about the Forever War, which I wrote about a lifetime ago. And somebody just came to the door and she's saying hi and all that. I don't know what it is. But yes, you see, the real world goes on even though the cameras are rolling. What can you say?
I think
Yeah,
everybody's experiencing that now. A lot of people work from home, but few people work from home with a full home of kids and
right.
spouses and everybody else.
Oh,
So,
what a nightmare. Yeah. No, I have not had a house full of kids ever. Sometimes I invite a house full of adults. That's what I get anymore. Uh, yeah, I guess we're supposedly locked in here and going through this, trial of coronavirus quarantine and so forth. But to Gay and me, to my wife and I, we're pretty much business as usual. It doesn't make too much difference to us. I sit around and write a little bit, draw a little, and go on the web as everybody does and see what's left of the world.
um, but regarding writing being easy, I think you might have that special. I've tried some writing and I found it to be pure pain and suffering, and the
Yeah.
results are nowhere near as good as I see from your books. So, um, I think what you do is real work and really important, actually.
Well, of course, it makes a big difference if somebody's paying you for it. And you have to get up and do it in the morning or you don't get any money. That's really a big difference between a writer with a capital W and a normal person who actually has somebody else to give them a job and a reason to get up in the morning. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm a writer, but so are most of the people I know. It's not a big deal.
Well, I had a few questions I've been going around asking people as sort of conversation starters.
Yeah.
The first one is, did you know that NASA is planning to land people back on the moon in 2024?
Yeah, I read about that. That's wonderful. I think that I wonder why they are waiting till 2024. I wonder why they have waited until 2024, but I understand why. I mean, it's a very expensive proposition, and they've got a million things to spend their money on that don't have nearly the, I don't know, what do you say? They don't have the box office of another moon landing. I mean, there are thousands of people in NASA trying to make a living off a very limited pool of money. And their stuff is really important. And many of those projects, you would you wouldn't say most of them, but I'd say a large percentage of them are the most important thing in this guy's life, for this woman's life. And to have that dependent on political stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the moon or anything to do with space or anything to do with science, I don't know. I thought it was a pretty bad intellectual environment when I started out in the 60s. And we didn't know how innocent and lily pure we were, but we were back then. I mean, just because you wanted something out of pure scientific curiosity, well, yeah, you could just do it. You could write up a paper, and if it's a good paper, you could get money for it. And nowadays, they just sort of look at you. I don't know. That's what it seems like to me. It's more difficult to get sponsorship. It's more difficult to get people interested. By people, I mean, not normal people. To me, normal people are like scientists and science fiction fans, people like that. And they are quite interested. I mean, it's science after all. It doesn't have to be justified.
Well, that's an interesting a point. So what would you see as being a good alternative to move to? And like, how would you change it?
Hmm. Well, right now, of course, we're in an emergency footing. So you can't say, well, we should just all change our lives and start concentrating on something else because we're in a plague. And basically, it is a plague. And that's what most people have to think about when they get up in the morning. And then you think about, well, we ought to go to the moon again. And somebody else will say, yeah, there's no plague there. Yeah,
I
I could just
saw,
tourists on the moon.
well, it's funny. That reminds me of a funny cartoon I saw where it had like the solar system, and it had with each planet how many deaths there were. And it's like, uh, all the deaths were on Earth, and it's like, see the trend or
Right. Who'd want to go there?
exactly.
Well, to get there, you have to put on the space helmet anyhow. Then if you leave it on, you're not going to get the virus. Okay.
Yeah,
Space suit
well,
will be okay.
we'll all be wearing spacesuits soon.
Uh,
So what do you think about space exploration in general? Do you think it's a worthy thing for society to spend money on, or is it more of kind of like a luxury?
well, those are two different questions. Yes, it is a luxury as opposed to eating and breathing. Uh, but as far as it being a necessary social activity, I think I give it pretty high marks because what does a culture aim for? I mean, yes, we're all for truth, justice, and the American way, but we should aim higher, we should aim longer. One thing that America has done that will last as long as any of the current cultures is space travel. And we're not alone in that. Of course, the Soviets might have done it without us, but they might not have. I think without the race to space, which is really kind of a funny thing to think about. I'm going to race to space. Well, what is that stuff all around you? Isn't that space? No, I think I'll race to the Earth. Oh, wait, that's down there too. Yeah. Anyhow, to me, it's funny because from the time I was 10, 9 or 10 or 11, I've been sort of really, really interested in space travel. And that was before there was any space travel. I mean, I was a teenager before they started sending satellites up and things. But I was sure that we were going to go to the moon and the planets and the stars and all that. It's just a matter of time, right? What I didn't realize was, well, no, it's not just a matter of time because people other than you have to be interested in going there. Because somebody's got to pay the ticket. And that is a really weird thing to tell a 12-year-old kid. Say, what do you mean? Doesn't everybody want to go to the moon? And then I realized, well, my mother doesn't want to, my father doesn't want to, none of the grown-ups around me want to. Of course, they're grown-ups, so they're already fucked. What can you say? They're not gonna. They have a absolutely weird and abstract way of thinking and looking at the universe. They don't know what's important and never have, but they stumble through and put groceries on the table and do things like that. Yeah. Now I had to live with this when I was a kid. You know, my parents really rolled their eyes at the idea of space travel, and science fiction was even worse. But even when I started publishing, they were still waiting for me to sort of get a real job. And then, well, what happened to me was the Hugos and Nebulas and the big awards and things. I mean, the grown-ups around you couldn't be expected to read your books. That's A, too much like work, and B, it would mean that what you were doing had substance. So as long as they don't have to read them, they don't have to, worry about them. But the awards started to mean, well, there are other people who are reading them, and you could melt that down and actually get a dinner out of it, that sort of thing. I don't know. It's a funny deal because you and I know, or most science fiction people know, the awards are a kind of a consensus measure, and it means that a lot of people thought your book was good. And it usually means that a lot of people bought your book and therefore thereby supported your activities. But to the outside world, they're going, he sits there in that little room and he says he's doing something, but every time I open the door, he's not doing anything. So that's what you do, Basically, a writer sits and stares into space, and every now and then types something up, or in my case, scratches it out with a fountain pen.
Yeah, it's difficult work, but I mean, at least there's a finished product at the end that people can read and appreciate. I feel like I work in the software industry on
Yeah,
very kind of deep down technical stuff that
yeah,
when I start talking to people, they can't relate to at all. And there's like no finished product that I could even show them.
right.
And my work looks similar to yours, as in it doesn't look like I'm doing anything ever.
And in both cases, you try to explain what you're doing, and they glaze over and say, "Yeah, right. I mean, yeah. So, how are the Mets doing?"
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, well, Elon Musk, have you heard anything about him and what he's been up to?
I don't follow that too closely. I've seen him on television a couple of times. Has he left the Earth yet, or no, I don't know. I mean, I know he was planning to, but I think it's great. I mean, I think it's wonderful that somebody who has billions and trillions of dollars is interested in abstractions at all. And what's doubly wonderful is he made that money pursuing abstractions. He didn't just inherit it or, just sell wonkers for, a lifetime. He actually had a dream and pursued it, and people paid him for it. And he's spending the money he got pursuing his dream by pursuing another one, a bigger one, which is wonderful.
And
Yeah.
he's had some success too with
Yeah.
relanding the first stage and
That was,
refueling it and reusing it.
yeah. That was also great television. I mean, you got to say, most scientific revolutions are not quite as photogenic as that one.
Oh yes, with you're talking about the test of Falcon Heavy with the car and the Starman inside it.
Yeah, well, just the landing on the platform, pitching in the ocean there. That's the
Oh,
one, not me. Ooh.
and he's currently in South Texas near Brownsville. He has a facility where he's building this huge 100% reusable rocket that could carry 100 people at a time.
Yeah.
And that's been really fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
It's gonna be transformative. Um,
So where's it going to go? When
well,
you get 100 people on a rocket ship, say, trust me, you're going to go someplace really interesting. Yeah, I read that story.
well, he's thinking in completely different orders of magnitudes of anything else that's been considered.
Right.
Instead of just building one of these ships that could carry 100 people, he's talking that would be used one time. He's saying that they could get it down to be able to use the same ship 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And then he's actually talking about building a factory that could produce 2 of these per week.
Wow.
So, I mean, he's literally talking about being able to launch megatons of material into space, which is,
And if they're running on hydrogen and oxygen fuel, that just puts water vapor in the atmosphere. Who could object to that? Yeah.
well, unfortunately, it's liquid methane.
Oh well. So, a few bugs to be ironed out.
Yeah.
I mean, what's a little acid rain?
Well, the thought is, on Mars they have carbon dioxide in abundance in the atmosphere, and with a little hydrogen and carbon dioxide and a little heat, you could produce methane. So that was one of the reasons why they were thinking of it. But there's no reason why you couldn't also take carbon dioxide out of the Earth's atmosphere to kind of do the same process here. And if you're taking out as much as you're putting in, then
Yeah.
maybe that reduces the effect.
Yeah. You getting in a zero sum game ultimately, except for all the energy you're pouring into the system. You really can't ignore that.
And also where you're putting it too.
Yeah.
I mean, literally that rocket is emitting all the way up into the vacuum, and you're polluting at every layer
Yeah.
of the atmosphere. So,
Or you're adding resources to various layers of the atmosphere. I mean, pollution is only resources that are in the wrong place temporarily.
oh, exactly. Oil is a pollutant. Uh,
Yes. Yeah, those dinosaurs didn't know when they croaked their final breath, at least I'm going to be oil. They
yeah,
didn't, but
yeah. It's the improper burial methods of the dinosaurs that.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, we don't know. It could be that some prehistoric Elon Musk went back and trained them to do this. They mutated into these oil-producing creatures in order to produce our era 100 gazillion years later, or 1,000 gazillion years later. I'm unclear as to what the gazillion actually is, but it's a large number.
I I love cartoons, and I saw another one where like NASA finally lands on the moon in 2024, and the astronaut says, "Houston, we have a problem," and in the background you see a dinosaur in an astronaut suit.
Yeah. Why didn't they tell us? uh,
Did you know that they discovered water ice on the poles of the moon?
yes, that's marvelous. Of course, they started looking a long time ago. I used it in a science fiction story 30 years ago, and they were looking then. So, I mean, they were looking before there were satellites in orbit, so look directly on the moon, of course. When I was an undergraduate in astronomy, they were searching spectroscopically for uh, evidence of water on the moon because, obviously we needed it. What was not so obvious was we might need it for fuel rather than for life support. But yeah, that's still an interesting wrinkle. I mean,
It's just amazing how cold the areas of the moon are where it is. I'm just wondering what's able to operate at those temperatures.
yeah, I don't know. Well, there's also a real lack of air and a huge commuting cost, that sort of thing, all sorts of industrial problems associated with it. But, if it's the cheapest way to get things done, it's possible we'll get it done.
Now, if it was safe and affordable, would you have any interest in going into space?
Sure. But safe and affordable are kind of loose terms. I mean, that is affordable if you're a whole country, an industrialized nation. and say, you know, what we really have to do is put an ancient science fiction writer on the moon. They say, okay, let's do it. Yeah, I mean, it could happen. Uh, yeah, I don't know when you start saying, well, you get the stuffy guy saying, what a waste of our resources, you know, to put an old science fiction writer on the moon, or even to put a young one on the moon. Well, you gotta, most science fiction readers will kick back and roll their eyes a little bit and say, yeah, you just don't know. You can't tell in the short run what the long run is going to be. Because if you could, we'd all invest in the short run thing and cash in and make a lot of money or whatever. Uh, yeah, I look. We like to be glib, of course. Writers are glib because they get paid by the word and they have to make sense. You know, you can't make this long series of differential equations and turn them into social extrapolation and come up with an answer that people can understand. You've got to make something that's punchy and quick. But yeah, is it worth doing? Well, you really don't have to be too sophisticated to step back and say, is anything worth doing? How can you pretend to make a final answer to that? I mean, we go back to you know, the arc, if you want, or the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Say, well, God, what a waste of time, and it's polluting. It's using human industry for absolutely backward, abstract things. And come on now, put it into agriculture. Now, if you put it into farms, you're going to get crops. But what are all these machines? Wheels. Give me a fucking break. What good is a wheel? I mean, really. It just takes money from the laboring man, you know, in the guise of making work easier. It just takes jobs away from the working man. Trust me on this. Uh, the wheel is the tool of the devil. Communists too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
that's sort of an interesting point
I don't
because,
know.
it's really difficult to tell what has potential value in the future. And I think one good thing about our system is that you can get together a group of people with resources that buy into a vision and go out and pursue it without necessarily getting everybody else to agree with you. Um, it's just about
That's
finding the people with the resources to
right.
do it.
And a certain length of vision. Yeah. Well, people with resources usually don't have a vision. Taking the usual conservative viewpoint, I say, well, people with money don't want to give it away, but you can talk sense into them. You know.
Talking about people with money and visions, there is this Japanese billionaire that's planning to send a group of artists, and by artists, he's using the most broad terms, writers, movie director, um, poet, sculpture, the whole spectrum of art, around the moon in 2023. Um, and as a writer who would be interested in going into space, is is that something that you think you would consider doing if the opportunity was there?
I'd be glad to do it if they could engineer it in such a way that an 80-year-old man can, be a useful component. Uh, I hope to be extremely healthy at 80 and say, give me a spacesuit. If you find one for a fat guy, no problem. Yeah, I would be glad to help along with something like that. I'm sure. but they're not going to ask me. Probably not.
Well, and the thought is, the people that we sent to the moon before, they were sent be a large. I mean, one of the criteria was being stoic, and kind of unemotive and what have you. I mean, these were not emotional communicators who were able to take that experience and sort of, you know, create, be able to share it among a vast a number of people. And I was wondering if you thought the thinking was right there, in the sense that send people who can feel what it's like to see Earth as a small
Yeah.
ball, and then be able to create art out of it.
Well, you've got to say you can't argue with success. Now, whatever they did worked because they did get people on the moon and back. And I would wish that it had been less of a militaristic and innately conservative enterprise. But you can't argue with success. It did work. And it was the same pattern, actually, that the Soviets used, and their program worked too. If you've got to do something huge and physical that involves large amounts of energy and money and things like that, well, our big models for those enterprises are military. And so when they set up NASA, it wound up being a rather military looking thing. Whereas all us science fiction people were going, no, no, didn't you ever read The Man Who Sold the Moon? You don't understand. It's got to be dreamers who take control of the heavens. And by God, then we'll do it right. By cracky. Well, by cracky, of course, they didn't do it that way. I don't know what we didn't know. Even those of us who could do the math, we didn't realize how hugely expensive an enterprise it was. You know, those of us who could do the math thought in terms of the, putting V2s up into the ionosphere and going, oh, look, we got numbers. Well, what you've got to really think about is you've got to overbuild these things, not just to specs, but way beyond specs, and saying some of them are going to blow up. And you've got to be prepared to sacrifice people and resources and just keep going. You don't quit because something blows up, right? You just keep going. We did it that way and succeeded. The Soviets did that way and succeeded. Well, okay. The Chinese would have as well, but they started a little later, It turns out that that's the price of admission to spaceflight. And if they had told us ahead of time that that's what it was going to be, we might not have pursued it. But of course, a lot of us thought that it was going to be even higher, even worse. And yet we kept going, which I'm so glad. But, I'd have to ask somebody, say a Trumpazoid kind of politician, or what can I think of as an adjective? But somebody who's not inclined to dream, and somebody who looks at the balance sheet to find out what the profit of an enterprise is going to be. And you'd never get space flight if you were limited to that. What we had, we had John F. Kennedy, who was a tremendously practical politician who understood abstractions. And so he says, Martin Luther King says we have a dream, but Kennedy rode on those coattails too. He's saying, well, if you don't dream, what are you going to get to, right? Well, I grew up in this era, so it's not as immediate to you, but I see we had Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy, absolutely polar opposite people. Johnson, the hard-headed frontier Texan guy, millionaire who fought his way up and blah, blah, blah. And Kennedy, the guy who was born into riches and could afford to dream because rich people can. And together they accomplished quite a good deal. But it was funny being a bystander watching it because I didn't want it to be that way. You know, I wanted it to be like the science fiction writers saw it. You know, I wanted to see the romantics win the space race, not the militarists, not the profit makers. Well, the people who win are the people with the biggest guns. And sometimes they're not guns, sometimes they're wallets. Yeah. So they won. And a practical person says, this is the way the world works. Let's just keep going. You know, you don't sit around and lick your wounds. You know, you go ahead and keep going in the direction you want to. So, see, to me, the dream of space flight, if you can even think of that in the lowercase present that we have now, it's not dead though. The dream changes its parameters. It even changes its destinations. I mean, do I want to go to the nearest star? Well, personally, I suspect I won't live long enough to do it. And even if I could get on a spaceship right now and go, I'm not sure whether I would. 4.3 years is a lot of time for a man who's almost 80 years old, you know. Do you want to be on a spaceship for the next 4.3 years, going at the speed of light?
Well, I
And
mean,
I've got to say, well,
you remember several years ago there was that Mars One project, and all these thousands of people said, "Yes, send me to Mars on a one-way trip."
yeah.
I'm wondering, after a month in lockdown, stuck in their own house, how many of them are actually still enthusiastic about that idea?
We've got to do a remailing now and see. Mm.
Well, Joe, unfortunately, I have to go, but I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Well, I'm glad you thought of me. So, yeah, I hope other people enjoy it too.
I hope you have a good day, and I look forward to reading the rest of your books. Unfortunately, Forever War is the only one I've read so far. But
Oh, well, but you've got a long coronavirus time to sit down with a stack of good books. And you could read some of mine too.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
You have a good day.
You too.